Welcome, everybody, to Eugene O'Neill 44.1, spring 2023. I'm here from Texas today. Rounding out the group will be book review editor Zander Brietzke, performance review editor Bess Rowan, and as always, our film crew, Eric Fraser Hayes and Allison. Thank you all for joining us. We start off this issue, as always, with the Lost and Found section. This one's called Postcards from the Past. We have a dyad of postcards from the past. The first one, written by the young aspirant playwright Lynn Riggs to his new agent, the estimable Barrett Clark from Biarritz in 1928, records Riggs's response to having seen Eugene O'Neill walk out of a patisserie. Now, he didn't talk to O'Neill. He couldn't possibly have worked up the courage at that stage of his life. But inside, he was going bananas. And he wrote Clark this effusive, short, but really just kind of lovely, boyish note about how great it was to run into the great man himself. The piece is introduced by James Cox, who is certainly among the foremost authorities on Lynn Riggs and Indigenous drama more broadly. Thanks very much for joining us, Jim. Michelle Slung, a miscellaneous writer, journalist, and editor, handles the second piece, a postcard to her uncle, Lois Schaefer, who would, of course, become O'Neill's great biographer. Here's what happened. Friends of Schaefer's, who don't know who they are, can't read the signatures, traveled to Schaefer's native Louisville, Kentucky, and sent Schaefer a postcard asking him how he possibly could have left such a beautiful city to move to New York. Well, you can answer that question as you will, but suffice to say it makes for engaging reading, and Michelle's introduction is just full of family warmth and writerly agility. It's a wonderful piece. The two essays in 44.1, I think even by the high standard I think we've set, I'm going to be clear about that, are absolutely superb. Patrick Chura opens up with a lengthy assessment of Shirley Graham's so-called Negro adaptation of the Hairy Ape that Graham tried but was kept from doing for the Federal Theater Project. A lot of you will know that O'Neill rejected the FTP's proposal in one of the ugliest letters that he ever wrote, full of ugly thoughts and ugly words and the sort of thing we just kind of wish hadn't happened. But Patrick doesn't stop there. He recognizes, for example, the plain fact that Graham found a great deal to admire in the Hairy Ape. What was that, he asks? How did that play out in her version? How does her version constitute a social critique that both in many ways condemns the assumption of O'Neill's original while honoring its triumph of craft? This one for me is a game changer. It's going to get a lot of attention. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments on it. Speaking of world-class scholarship, we're proud again to have William Davies King on board. He's written a really probing, extensive analysis about the persistent presence, both visual and thematic, of Maxim Gorky in O'Neill's drama, particularly, but not only, The Iceman Cometh. I'm not going to tell you too much about that one because a lot of the delight of reading Dave King's prose is just following that mind of his through all these labyrinths and highways and byways and really savoring the surprise of ending up in the strange places he takes us. Many of you will know that the Practitioner's Colloquium is always among my favorite features in the Eugene O'Neill Review, and this one's a real doozy. Lined up 4 theater practitioners to comment on directing, acting in, or simply reimagining plays by O'Neill that they've long admired but haven't yet previously had a chance to work on or with. The section opens up with commentary by the First Nations playwright Alanis King, a big favorite of mine, about Morning Becomes Electra, a play that it turns out has been a big part of her life, thought, and practice since she was just starting her career as a theater practitioner, indeed, even from her student days. The play stays with her still, its meanings changing and continuing to nourish her own practice. Adrian Earl Pender, known to many of us in the O'Neill Society as the author of N, but also author of quite a few other plays, also takes up morning becomes a lector. And she has a remarkable idea that I think deserves very serious attention. She imagines the play as a telenova. It's too long, she says. No one's going to sit through it these days. Well, she's probably right. And her workaround is absolutely fascinating. It's tempting, I think, to read the piece as whimsical, but I don't do so myself. I think it makes a very serious and very plausible suggestion that I would love to see actualized. Old friend Alex Rowe of the Metropolitan Theater and Metropolitan Playhouse and Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse joins us with comments on The Great God Brown, which he has yet to direct, but about which he has thought a great deal. He confronts head on the problems that masking poses in that play from a practitioner's point of view, and in the process manages to create what strikes me as among the very finest critical statements to date on that magnificent play. Another entry I'm really excited about hearing from our readership about. The quartet rounds out with a splendid contribution by Annabelle Capper, a well-known actor and educator, and clearly an accomplished writer. She's talking about strange interlude. She spins out an extended metaphor about food and serving and nutrition. What she wants us to do is sit down, let her serve us this banquet that she calls a strange interlude. No shortcuts, no telenovelas, nothing. She wants the whole thing. She demands, she says at some point, that we pay attention. It's remarkably engaging writing and astute criticism. And again, a set of ideas that I hope will manifest themselves in the field of practice. This leaves the used book review. Thank you, Dan McGovern, for writing about two books that I had in mind when I conceived this series, this feature a number of years ago. Dan took on S.N. Berman's deeply unattractive and morally stingy play, But for Whom Charlie, and Hamilton Basso's novel, Pompey's Head, which I suspect no one has read in the last 50 years or so. Both of these works concern O'Neill. They also concern Faulkner. How much of each, in what mix, and to what effect? No one's really talked about that before. Dan talks about it here, and in the process, like some of the other contributors, manages to turn a review or reflection environment into an occasion for really informed, productive scholarship. That's it for me here, but I'll be back with you after we've heard from Bess and then Zander. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex, for that wonderful handoff. And yes, it's Bess Rowan. I'm here with your performance reviews. We have 5 performance reviews for this issue, once again spanning the gap between virtual streaming performances and embodied live performances in a couple places across the country, which is exciting. This also marks the end of an era. These are the final moments of the Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse reviews, which kept us entertained during COVID. But first, we start off with a performance review from Ron Quirk, who covers Adrian Earl Pender's N, which you heard Adrian's name mentioned by Alex a few minutes ago, talking about the contributions to the actual issue as a whole. But Adrian Pender's play, N, has actually also been featured in our review before. There was an Amazon streaming version of it made into a movie called The Black Emperor of Broadway, and Shane Bro covered that for us a few years ago now. So it's really exciting to have had this play, N, staged in Washington, D.C. at the Keegan Theater. And Ron Quirk covers that for us with wonderful connections to, of course, facts we know about Charles Gilpin's real experience in The Emperor Jones, which is the basis for the play. So that's a really exciting review. And we haven't really had much work from Washington, D.C. before. So it's exciting to feature a new part of the region as well. Next, we move on to our final 2 Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse reviews. The end, truly the end of an era. The first one comes from Ash Marinaccio, who's New York based. She covers a play called Bernice, which is a very interesting short play about domestic life. Not a play that's done that often, but Ash finds some really interesting things to cover within it. So she makes a compelling argument for the place of this play within, the realm of the Provincetown players and what kinds of themes we can see worked out in it. Next, we move on to Kristen Mandrakia, who is from my neck of the woods around Philly. And she is, among other things, a scholar of Disney. So she has a really interesting take on this play called The Sea Lady and how it fits into our representation of sea ladies or mermaids. So that's a really exciting point of view that comes in through this review as well. And that is the very final, The Sea Lady is the final one of our Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse coverage, but we're excited to see what Alex Rowe does live so that we can continue to cover not the virtual Playhouse, but just the regular Metropolitan Playhouse. Next, we move on to James Armstrong's coverage of A Touch of the Poet from Irish Repertory Theatre. This was a really interesting production because it spanned COVID in this fascinating way. There was a streamed version of the play, and then there was a live version of the same production of the play. The streamed version was interesting because it involved people from multiple countries, different time zones, and it involved a digital layering, which made it look like this more than one person was in a room at a time, even when they were across the country and also across the world. So I'd never seen anything like that before. I think that's a really important innovation here. And James covered both versions, the virtual and the live. So he does make references in between. And but he just has a really solid grasp on performance language and how to really talk about the greatness of watching something like this live. So I'm very grateful for that review. And last but certainly not least, we have Catherine Young talking about Robert O'Hara's direction of Long Day's Journey into Night. Robert O'Hara, some would call him an auteur. He is very well known as a playwright and as a director. His most famous directing credit has to be his direction of Slave Play, Jeremy O. Harris's Slave Play, off-Broadway and on Broadway. He also wrote plays such as Booty Candy and Mankind. And here, his take on Long Day's Journey, he radically cuts the play. It's almost in half. And then he casts white actors as the parents and Black actors as the brothers, which lends in a really important racial perspective and reading to this play. And I think it's so important that we watch contemporary working directors and theater makers of all kinds take up O'Neill's work and grapple with it like this. So it's wonderful to have Catherine's take on that. So definitely check that out. So once again, so grateful for all of these wonderful performance reviews. Pick up a copy of this issue and you can travel the world without leaving your couch. So for more of that, I now pass you on to Zander, who's going to talk to us about some book reviews.
Hi, folks. I'm Zander Brietzke. I'm book editor of The Review. Glad to be back with you for two more books for this upcoming issue. The first of which is Max Schulman's The American Pipe Dream, Performance of Addiction, 1890 and 1940. I was very excited about this title and seized on it immediately. I thought, well, this can't possibly not have plenty of information about Eugene O'Neill, specifically, of course, The Iceman Cometh, and of course, our favorite drug addict, Mary Tyrone. Sadly, The Iceman Cometh is not in it at all, and Mary comes in at the conclusion. Max sort of introduces Long Day's Journey at the beginning and sort of says, well, you all know this play, and I'll give you a little bit at the end. Sadly, that was not enough for me. There are a lot of other plays he talks about, most of which few people have heard of. Even Alex Rowe hasn't staged these plays, I don't think. There's quite a bit of sociological history. There's quite a bit of performance tradition that he talks about. On the positive side, Max Schulman writes extremely well. There's just, for my interests, not enough O'Neill, and I thought there would be. And that's important for the review, which was written by Stephen Bloom, who is, a really good writer, and his review could probably be called "Waiting for Mary," because he talks about in pretty much the full length of his review why Schulman should have talked about Mary more and how it would have benefited the book and why that would be important. So check out the book, but definitely read the review for insight. Really a sort of interesting. Steve is an expert on addiction and substance abuse in O'Neill, and he writes about that very well in his 4 or 5 pages of this review, and it's really quite well done. The other review, the other book we have this time is a book by Jeremy Killian from Routledge Press, or Rutledge Press. You say Routledge, I say Rutledge, of 2022. Eugene O'Neill's Philosophy of Difficult Theater. Pity, Fear, and Forgiveness is the subtitle. What he means by difficult requires some explanation. He doesn't mean difficult as in hard to understand or hard to produce. We certainly know it's hard to produce. He means difficult in the sense of the plays raise negative emotions that are hard to deal with. It's Killian, the author, is a philosopher in background, and he takes us through Aristotle, a little bit of Hegel, and quite a bit of Nietzsche. Turns out Nietzsche influenced O'Neill significantly, which Bryce Ezel, our reviewer, picks up in quite a thorough and positive review of the book. Bryce, our readers will know from a couple of years ago, he published an article comparing John Robin Bates's Desert Cities to O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night. Now he's back with us, taking his philosophy background to an approach to Killian's book and giving a sort of thorough explication of it. I think good reviews are ones in which you can get a sense of the whole book if you simply read the review. And for Bryce's review, as well as Steve Bloom's review, you get a sense of what those authors had in mind, what they tried to do, how they succeeded, and maybe what they didn't do quite as well. And you get that in their reviews, and so it's very worthwhile. And I look forward to them coming out, and I think you will really like them. Now, back to Alex for a quick sum up.
Thank you so much, Bess and Zander, for those wonderful presentations. And thank you again, and as always, Eric and Allison, for artistry, technique, support. It occurred to me a while ago that although it will be, as will be clear to anybody watching these promotional spots, I am the least proficient among the, for lack of a better term, actors in this assemblage. Indeed, I have no experience acting at all. How lucky I am, therefore, to have had all of my attempts, however minor they might be, directed by Eric Fraser Hayes, our #1 interpreter of the plays of the great Eugene O'Neill. That feels pretty special to me. I think EOR 44.1 is going to feel pretty special to you. As you've heard, it offers a diversity, a bouquet, a veritable nosegay of offerings, and I do hope you'll share all of our enthusiasm for the contents. As always, I invite, indeed heartily solicit, your thoughts on each and every last thing in the issue. Please be sure that I take all these comments very seriously. They mean a great deal to me. So I'll stay tuned into that. You stay tuned into us, and together we'll move ahead. Looking forward to that. Thank you all so very much. Bye-bye now.